Hello, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Yemi Obi, and I'm your host for this topic, which is decarbonization of energy in Nigeria. So the Efikos, some of you have already joined us in the past, but for those of you that are new, well, the Efikos, we are a group of professionals who are passionate about oil and gas and energy development in sub-Saharan Africa. We're hoping to bring together engineers, scientists, commercial and financial professionals, and other people who have genuine interest in who are effectively stakeholders across the value chain of oil and gas. We hope to share knowledge and expertise, which by creating value, and therefore hosting this platform really to share knowledge and increase interest of projects within sub-Saharan Africa. So for today, our topic on energy transition and decarbonization, we'll be talking about carbon capture, use and storage. We'll be talking about hydrogen and biomass, as well as carbon offsets and trading. So why is all of this important? As many of you would know, obviously there's been a lot of talk in the media about carbon and the effect on the environment. So really the purpose is, let's see other ways of generating energy which does not involve hydrocarbons. And if we have to use hydrocarbons, such as biomass or such as traditional oils and hydrocarbon oils, fuels, gases, then how can we capture some of this carbon that we emit into the atmosphere? So joining me today would be the Efikos talking about just that. To formally reintroduce myself, I am a chartered engineer with over 11 years experience in the energy and oil and gas industry. I am certified in leadership and management from the Chartered Management Institute, and I also hold a master's degree in engineering from University of Leeds. So along with me, the first speaker would be Debola Adeyemo. Debola is also a chartered chemical engineer who specializes in process safety and engineering. He is a published author who's focused in innovative CO2 capture, and he does this in collaboration with the National Research Council of Canada. He's also an Efikos co-founder. After Debola would be Emmanuel Prier. So along the line, you might hear people call him Banji. So Banji is an energy consultant who specializes in improvement solutions. He has over 15 years experience, again, in oil and gas and process improvements, acquisitions and divestitures, including in renewable energies. And Emmanuel holds a BSc in geology and a degree in petroleum geoscience from Imperial College in London. He's also another Efikos co-founder. Our final speaker will be Tolu Abudiore. Tolu is a seasoned consultant with over 15 years experience in infrastructure projects. He holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's in environmental engineering from the University of Leeds. Yet again, another Efikos co-founder. So this really is the webinar hosted by us, the Efikos executive team members, and we're hoping that you would learn something from today. So I will pass you on to our first speaker, who is Debola. Debola, are you ready? Debola, you may be on mute. If you can hear me, please confirm.
Hi, Amy, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Brilliant.
Great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. I'll be talking about carbon capture, use and storage to start with, and then I'll move on to hydrogen. So there's a lot I can talk about on carbon capture, use and storage. So I'll just give you a brief overview of what I'll be talking about today. I'll give you a bit of an initial description, talk about why carbon capture and storage is important, uses of carbon dioxide, various capture technologies, global status of CCS, and then I'll go into a few case studies. And to round off, I'll talk about or share a few thoughts about CCS opportunities in Nigeria. So to kick us off, what is carbon capture? So this effectively is separating out waste carbon dioxide from other gases in order to produce a concentrated form of carbon dioxide, which can be used for other purposes. So this waste carbon dioxide is generated through fossil fuel combustion or industrial processes such as cement manufacture, steel, or chemical production. So usually from these processes, the carbon dioxide is in low concentration in combination with other gases, and the capture process basically concentrates the carbon dioxide into a pure stream that can then be used for other purposes. So use and storage really is self-explanatory. Use involves using the captured CO2 for other purposes such as agriculture, food packaging and drinks, enhanced oil recovery by injecting into oil reservoirs, or conversion into value-added products such as fuels and chemicals. Storage, on the other hand, involves taking the compressed CO2 and storing it deep underground, either in saline aquifers or depleted oil and gas reservoirs, with the intent that the CO2 is stored for thousands of years and is effectively taken out of the atmosphere. So if you bring it together, carbon capture and storage, the graphic on screen kind of shows you what that involves. So the CO2 is captured at a location, transported, and then stored deep underground. So for the next couple of slides, I'll talk a bit about carbon capture and storage, and then I'll come back to use subsequently. So why carbon capture and storage, or CCS as it's known? So energy demand continues to grow and forecast at about 164 gigawatts of renewables in the next 20 years. But there will also be increase in use of fossil fuels such as oil, coal, and gas. Now, if we want to continue to use fossil fuels as well as not exceed the global warming targets set by the Paris Agreement, we need to find ways to remove the carbon which will be produced as a result of using those fossil fuels. Renewable sources will not be enough by themselves, and we need to balance the process of removing CO2 emissions from the economy, as well as continuing to maintain good economic growth. Renewables plus CCS will make energy potentially up to 62% cheaper than renewables alone, according to analysis carried out by the International Energy Agency. And CCS enables us to reuse oil and gas facilities to transport and store CO2. So this involves things like pipelines or depleted reservoirs, which have already had lots of investment in them, and actually using them to recapture some of the CO2 that's been produced from their use. There are also regions in the world with costly fossil fuel powered plants, which are already built and will not be easily, taken offline or stop their use. And they may also have low renewable energy potential. So in areas of the world where renewables cannot easily replace fossil fuel generation, carbon capture is an important tool to reduce the carbon emissions in those areas. The IEA again has analyzed emissions forecasts for the future and predict that in order to limit temperature rise to about 1.8 degrees C, about 9% of the cumulative carbon emissions by 2050 will have to be captured. And finally, last but not least, using biomass as a fuel source plus CCS can result in negative carbon emissions. And by this, I mean biomass is grown, absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere, and when it's burned, the CO2 produced is captured and then stored away from the ground, thereby reducing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Now I'll talk a little bit about different uses of carbon dioxide. It's a very versatile compound which can be used in construction materials for making industrial gases and fluids, producing chemicals, fuels, new materials, and also in the agriculture and food industry. So if you can capture this CO2, there are a variety of uses we can apply it to. So now I'll move on to capture of carbon from fossil fuels. So fossil fuel in power generation make up about 38% of global CO2 emissions. So if you can address the CO2 from these sources, you can really make a big impact on decarbonization. So in terms of capture of CO2 from fossil fuels, there are three main technologies involved. One is pre-combustion capture, the second is post-combustion capture, and finally, oxy-fuel combustion. So I'll start off with post-combustion capture. As it says in its name, the capture of CO2 happens after the fuel has been burnt or combusted. And in this process, the fuel and air is combined, burnt in a boiler or some other system, used to generate electricity, and the exhaust gases, which contain CO2 and other gases, is passed through a capture system, which concentrates the CO2, which can then be compressed and sent to storage. The exhaust gases, which are now free of CO2, can then be safely released to the atmosphere without releasing any CO2. Pre-combustion capture, on the other hand, involves capturing the CO2 prior to the combustion process. And in this case, the first step involves separating nitrogen from oxygen, and then combining this oxygen with the fuel in a chemical process to produce CO2 and hydrogen. The CO2 is then captured, compressed, and can be sent to storage, while the hydrogen can then be burned to generate power and then produces only water with no CO2 emissions produced at that stage. Finally, oxy-fuel combustion, similar to pre-combustion capture, involves separating nitrogen from the air. So you have pure oxygen, you burn a fuel in pure oxygen, and then you generate exhaust gases which have a higher concentration of CO2 than you would have had if you didn't separate out the nitrogen. And that pure stream of CO2 can then be compressed and then sent to storage, and the power generated, exported to the grid. So those are the three key technologies used for capturing CO2 from fossil fuel power generation, of which post-combustion capture is the most prevalent method. I'm now going to talk about a novel technology which can be applied to capture CO2 from the air, literally at any location on the planet, if you so desire. To summarize, this process involves taking in ambient air, which has low CO2 concentrations, say 3 or 4%, passing it through a system where it's chemically bound to a filter, and then heating up that filter, which then releases concentrated CO2, which can be used for other purposes. The picture you can see on screen there is from a facility built by Climeworks, which captures CO2 from the air, and the captured CO2 is used to increase the yield in greenhouses which grow tomatoes, for example. So basically, this process can be applied at any point on the earth, does not need to be necessarily combined with the power station as the other examples we've talked about. This is just another pictorial representation of what a direct air capture facility could look like. And you have rows and rows of these devices intended to capture CO2 from the air. And as with the other CO2 capture technologies I've described previously, this can also be combined with geological storage underground, enhanced oil recovery, and fuel production. So very versatile technology, still in development, but with potential for application in various locations. I'm now going to talk about carbon capture and storage at scale and where we are in the world as a whole. So as of 2018, there were about 18 large-scale plants in operation. And if you look at this map on screen, you can see that there is a concentration of those circles, which each represent a facility in North America. So there's a few in Europe, a few in China, Australia, and very few elsewhere. And the main reason you have that concentration of sites, if you like, in the US and Canada is because carbon capture and storage in those locations has been combined with enhanced oil recovery. So because of the commercial benefit of being able to increase oil production by using captured carbon dioxide, there's been a higher penetration, if you like, of the technology in North America. I'm now going to take you through a couple of case studies which give you a bit of flavor of what's happening in Africa as a whole, and just to try and highlight areas of interest. So the first case study is about the Salah gas facility in Algeria, which is a gas development producing about 1 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas. But as this natural gas is produced, it contains about 5 to 10% of CO2. So the project spent some additional money to capture this CO2 and to re-inject it into the ground. And over the period from 2004 to 2011, roughly about 4 million tons of CO2 was captured. And what this facility enabled the industry to do was to learn a lot more about the monitoring technology required for safely storing CO2. And from this project, there was no leakage, storage integrity was verified. So really successful example of carbon capture and storage. Second example is from a facility in Newcastle in South Africa, which produces chemicals for the leather industry. So one of the precursor chemicals required for making these leather tanning chemicals requires CO2. So previously, this facility used to import CO2 from an external provider to support its manufacture, and then subsequently decided to capture some of the CO2 produced on site from the production of steam and use that in the chemical process. So this effectively reduced the plant's emissions by about 25%, with about 60,000 tons of CO2 a year captured, and is a great example of what we mean by carbon capture and usage. So it's usage of CO2 to produce value added products. Now, to talk about CCS potential in Nigeria or Africa, just to wrap up on CCS, obviously the key opportunity we would like to think about is enhanced oil recovery. So if you remember, as I mentioned earlier, a great aspect of the increase of use of CCS in the US and Canada is for enhanced oil recovery. And there are examples available which estimate that onshore depleted fields in Nigeria have the potential for recovering anywhere from 12 to 30 million additional barrels, yielding significant revenues. However, in order to be able to implement this type of project, you need to have sufficient enhanced oil recovery or EOR ready CO2 supplies. So we currently don't have that at the moment in country, but if we were, for example, to set up a capture facility on a power plant, that could potentially provide a source of CO2. So from a storage perspective, a key requirement for building out or increasing carbon capture and storage usage is understanding what the storage capability is, how much CO2 can be stored and where. So when you've done some analysis to understand these locations, then industrial policies and plans can then be put in place. So other countries like the US, Canada, China, Australia, Japan have carried out storage assessments, and they're aware of the optimum locations in those countries for storing CO2, and they're using that information to inform development plans for future projects. Finally, last but not least, is the thinking around how we plan our future projects. So even if you're not ready at the moment to install carbon capture and storage facilities as part of your industrial facilities, you can make such power plants or industrial facilities in such a way that they can be suitable for future introduction of carbon capture and storage. And this is described as making those facilities capture ready. It means providing, for example, space on the plot plan for locating this carbon capture equipment and locating the industries that produce a lot of carbon dioxide in clusters and hubs so that it can be easily connected together to capture the carbon and store it. So I hope that's giving you a good flavor of carbon capture use and storage in Nigeria. And I'll now move on to hydrogen. So hydrogen is the most important, most abundant element in the universe. And a key characteristic is when it's burned in air, it produces no carbon dioxide. It produces just water. It's got excellent flammability as a fuel and actually has better energy density on a weight basis than liquid fuels such as gasoline or diesel. The caveat there is obviously that hydrogen exists as a gas, and in order to concentrate it into a form to give it this energy density, you need to apply quite a great deal of energy to either compress it as a gas or liquefy it. It can also be produced from multiple energy sources, including renewables, biomass, and fossil fuels, and is regarded as an energy carrier for the future because it can be produced, stored, and transported in a variety of ways. If you remember your basic chemistry, you'll know that hydrogen is the first element in the periodic table. And this year at the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, which unfortunately have been postponed due to COVID, it was supposed to achieve another first. So the 2020 Tokyo Olympics plan to use hydrogen as the fuel for the Olympic torches and for the Olympic cauldron at the stadium. So just a little bit of trivia there for you to remember for your next pop quiz or trivia competition. So how's hydrogen produced? As I said, it can be produced from a variety of sources, including gas, oil, coal, biomass, renewables, and nuclear. The most common methods at the moment are natural gas reforming and electrolysis. And reforming is a chemical process where natural gas is combined with steam at high temperature to produce hydrogen and carbon dioxide. And currently over 50% of hydrogen production today is produced using this technology. The second aspect of hydrogen production is electrolysis, and this involves using electricity to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. The main technologies in use for this currently are alkaline electrolysis. However, new technologies such as membrane and solid oxide technologies are emerging. The graphic you can see on screen there just shows the various sources of hydrogen and the key technologies you can use to produce the hydrogen. So you may have heard hydrogen being described with different colors and may wonder what that means. In essence, the different colors of hydrogen refer to the different sources and environmental impact of the hydrogen produced. So moving on across the screen from brown to green, starting off with brown hydrogen, this is hydrogen produced from coal, which generates significant quantities of CO2. You then have gray hydrogen produced from natural gas, which generates less CO2 than brown. And then you have blue hydrogen, which is generated from natural gas, but is combined with carbon capture and storage, CCS, such that there's a reduced amount of CO2 emitted. And finally, you've got green hydrogen, which is produced from renewable sources of electricity, such as solar and wind, to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, thereby not producing any CO2 at all in that process. There's also a term called clean hydrogen, which is increasingly used to describe both blue and green hydrogen. So why do we think hydrogen is important as an energy carrier and a fuel for the future? The first point to mention is about deep decarbonization. So there are certain aspects of the industrial sector which will be hard to decarbonize by virtue of their operations. So areas such as iron and steel, cement and chemicals will be fundamentally difficult to abate using renewables. And hydrogen can be used instead in these industries to remove some of their CO2 emissions. If you look at the graphic on screen, iron and steel, cement, refining aluminium, they make up roughly about 20% of CO2 emissions, so a significant quantity. Second point why hydrogen is important is the rise in renewable power, and hydrogen can be used to improve flexibility, manage demand, and store energy. So for example, if you have a period of time where more renewable energy is being produced than the grid can absorb, that excess renewable energy can be used to produce hydrogen, which is then stored. And then during periods where you don't have enough power from renewables, that hydrogen can be used in a power plant to produce electricity. So that hydrogen could play an important role in that process for helping the expansion of renewable power. Last but not least is energy security. Some countries are looking at using hydrogen to mitigate dependence on oil and other hydrocarbon imports. So if you imagine a situation where a country has a lot of renewable power which it can generate and it has access to water, it can basically produce its own hydrogen for use in whatever sectors are required without actually depending on imports of fuel from other countries. So I'll briefly talk about different uses of hydrogen. Key uses at the moment is as a chemical feedstock in manufacture of ammonia, in refining processes and production of methanol. It can also be used in power generation, for example, in combination with pre-combustion capture of CO2 that I talked about earlier, and also in ammonia combustion, in which ammonia serves as a form of CO2, of hydrogen storage in a concentrated form. Hydrogen can also be used for heating, both for homes and for industrial processes, by burning the hydrogen and utilizing the heat generated. And finally, it can also be used in transportation, particularly for heavy-duty trucks and ships. And the graphic on screen there just shows you three concepts that Airbus is looking at for the future for producing hydrogen-powered commercial planes, with the first flights planned for 2035. So clearly lots of interest in using hydrogen and lots of plans in the pipeline. So to round off my presentation today, I just wanted to share a few thoughts about the outlook for hydrogen. In the short term, gray and blue hydrogen, if you remember, produced from natural gas, will likely dominate in the short term because that's where the bulk of the production happens today. And in the long term, green hydrogen will begin to dominate. The growth of hydrogen will be driven primarily by two factors: the cheapness of the feedstock to produce hydrogen and renewable power, really. And especially for green hydrogen, when cheaper renewable power plus reducing costs of the electrolysis process combine, they will drive increased green hydrogen growth. And there are some projections saying that could start to happen as close as 2025. In terms of countries with large hydrocarbon resources, production of hydrogen plus CCS could enable those countries to continue to use their hydrocarbon resources, even in a world that's carbon constrained or a net zero environment. This won't happen very quickly. The market and technology scale up required for this will take decades. And if you look at the graphic you can see on screen there, as an engineer, I do love a good bar chart. It shows that the increase in use of hydrogen from 2020 to 2050 will be effectively a tenfold increase. And this is from the Hydrogen Council. Finally, a number of countries are really putting a lot of effort in developing their hydrogen usage plans and technology. Japan is looking to increase its hydrogen usage. Canada is looking to become a leading exporter of hydrogen. And Saudi Arabia recently announced a large billion-dollar project to produce renewable hydrogen. The EU is also looking at, including hydrogen production in its plans to build back better after the coronavirus crisis. So in Africa, where do we stand and where could we go to in terms of hydrogen? I think we need to look at the two areas I mentioned earlier, cheap feedstock and power. So areas where we've got access to cheap natural gas, for example, those areas could potentially begin to look at utilizing hydrogen production from there. And areas where we can produce lots of renewable power, we can look at generating green hydrogen from there as well. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And I will now hand you back to Yemi.
Thank you very much for that lovely presentation, Debola. That was really insightful. Of course, you gave us two different presentations, one on carbon dioxide capture and the other one on hydrogen. But I do have some questions for you, just to put you on the spot.
Sure.
But maybe to support you, I could bring in Banji as well for some geological aspects of my questions. So Banji, if you can come online, please, and we can see you. Fantastic.
Hi, how you doing?
Very good. Thank you for coming online. Okay, so obviously we've just heard the presentation about CO2 capture and how a lot of other countries are already considering where is best to place this geographically. So can you tell us maybe where in Nigeria we might look to start to build such industries for carbon capture and effectively usage?
With regards to carbon capture, the best place or the best location with regards to where to place, projects or, store carbon is from a geological perspective is more where it is sedimentary rocks are located. So basically soft rocks. And a good chunk of the soft rocks in Nigeria are located down south. So more from the middle belt, but predominantly down south. So, Niger Delta, Lagos, Ogun State, Ibadan, the likes in some areas where that you have good porosity and permeability, and potentially you have a good cap rock above, so like a shale or the likes, or even limestone, so that that you can store it comfortably with the assurance that it doesn't leak out. Now, some questions have been raised with regards to hard rocks, so like igneous rocks and metamorphic rocks, which are technically located in the northern parts of Nigeria. There have been cases and there have been projects around the world where you can store in those particular types of rocks, but it comes with its, with its challenges. So the safest place to store it in Nigeria is, down south, where we have sedimentary rocks located.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. So of course, a lot of the CO2 is also being produced down south as well. I suppose that one should encourage industrialization all across the country, but at least from the hydrocarbon element, and which, like Debola mentioned about capturing that and then using that in enhanced oil recovery. That it could be a functional location anywhere, and the right sort of soil topography is available down south. So do we know if any such projects are planned for Nigeria?
I know that I've read up there are quite a couple of some some of the larger firms, larger oil companies have looked into it, because it's like Debola mentioned, enhanced oil recovery has been a way that they tend to increase the production in oil fields. And also quite a couple of companies have tried to avoid flaring due to political and political policies and fines, which Nigerian government has kind of placed. They try to avoid having to flare gas. So the easiest thing is just to re-inject it back into the field as either the crude oil or the gas is being produced, and just store it there and plug and abandon the well. So there have been projects that have pilot projects, I can put it that way, with regards to CO2 in Nigeria, but not sure if it's on a commercial scale.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Banji.
Thank you.
So, Debola, just checking out again on that safety element now of both the CO2 being an asphyxiant, of course, and hydrogen being very explosive in the right mixtures with oxygen. So how ready are we in Nigeria for hydrogen effectively, and what safety considerations might we look at if looking to bring in that technology in country?
That's an excellent question. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. So there are hazards associated with both carbon dioxide and hydrogen. So as you mentioned, carbon dioxide is an asphyxiant, which basically means if you've got large concentrations of it, it can stop you from taking in oxygen and result in death. And people who read the media might be aware of an incident that happened in Africa, I think Cameroon, a number of years ago, where there was a Lake Inyos, that released a lot of carbon dioxide and unfortunately resulted in fatalities of a number of people. The risk is, if you start to concentrate carbon dioxide in large quantities and transport it, you need to make sure those systems are designed, maintained, and operated in a safe fashion in line with the applicable regulations to prevent causing impacts to residents and the wider society. Similarly for hydrogen, it's a very flammable gas with a wider flammability range than natural gas. Therefore, you need to make sure the right, again, design, maintenance, and operations of those systems to avoid having impacts. We're very familiar in Nigeria, for example, with pipeline explosions and fires. And the last thing you want to do is create those types of incidences. So to summarize, you need to make sure we have the right legal framework and the right design, maintain, and operate frameworks to actually utilize these technologies in a safe way.
Absolutely. I think you've nailed it on the head there, the infrastructure and the integrity of such in terms of safety. I mean, in other countries, they're already looking at hydrogen fuel cells for cars, the pumps effectively where you can top up and refill. So all of this sort of considerations as far as electrical hazards and explosion, you need to really consider those very carefully, I think, before bringing in such usage in country. So how ready is Nigeria for that, or is that still something that we're still very much hydrocarbon based, would you say?
I think at the moment we are very much hydrocarbon based, but I think the fundamentals of managing those systems are very similar. So we need to improve on how we design, operate, maintain the systems, especially if they're going to be in operation for long periods of time. And fundamentally, there's no fundamental difference there. We just need to apply that same mindset and the same rigor to hydrogen and CCUS in future.
After all, it is the most abundant element in the universe. So
absolutely,
how brilliant would it be to be able to tap into that?
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Debola. And I think we still got Emmanuel, who, as I say, aka Banji, on the line. So Emmanuel, I believe you're going to talk to us next about biomass.
Yes, so I'm going to walk us through biomass, what it is, where it is, and how it operates based on projects available in sub-Saharan Africa. So I'll just quickly run us through that.
Would you like to share your screen with us, and then we can take you from there, please?
Yes. Yep. So like I said, what I'll be talking about is biomass. I'll just quickly run us through it, and just basically try to impart a bit of knowledge into everyone with regards to what it is, where it's located, and type of projects, because it's abundantly available in Africa, and we tend to just overlook exactly what it is, even though we tend to call it something else. So the question is just a quick overview of what it is. Biomass is renewable energy source that is derived from living or recently living organisms. It includes biological materials, and there has been the issue, or there has been the misconception that coal can be categorized as biomass, but it's not, because it's not organic material. Energy derived from biomass is mostly used to generate electricity and to produce heat. And we tend to, for the electricity points, we tend to identify this in eastern parts of Africa, and heat generally, in villages and local areas, this is the case. Thermal energy is extracted by means of combustion, pyrolysis, and gasification. And I'll mention projects that do have gasification in East Africa towards the end of the project presentation. And biomass can be chemically and biochemically treated to convert it to a rich energy fuel. So what are the types of biomass? Like I said, wood fuel. So basically, trees, woods that are used around the world. That is one type of biomass. Rubbish, which are identified in basically all around the world, in areas that kind of dump landfills and the likes. We also have alcohol fuels, crops, and landfill gases. So these are good examples of what biomasses are and what they technically have been identified as. So just putting it more into concept in our minds, exactly what how it is the scale is. So we have wood waste, which tends to move, tends to be transported truck transport and taken all the way to power plants, which ends up being electricity and generating CO2, which is technically a big issue for biomass. We definitely have environmental advantages associated with it. So it's a renewable resource compared to the likes of gas and crude oil. It's located and it reduces landfills. It definitely protects clean water supplies, because that has been a case with regards to conventional and unconventional hydrocarbon exploration and exploitation around the world. It also reduces acid rain and smog, which has been associated with flaring of gases. And it reduces greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. So biomass has its advantages, environmental advantages, compared to conventional exploration and production, oil and gas. So where can it be found? It's found in sewage, forestry, crops and residues, animal residues like cow dung and the likes, industrial residues, and even agricultural crops and residues. So basically, it's found in different areas and different regions and different places around, which technically helps with regards to biomass. Biomass is associated with carbon emission, like I mentioned, and because it emits carbon dioxide when it naturally decays and when it's used for energy source. Living biomass in plants and trees tend to absorb the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis, like we know, which plants technically use in creating. And biomass causes a closed cycle with no net emission of greenhouse gases. So basically, biomass has an association or relation with regards to carbon emission. Once there's an advantage, there definitely is some form of disadvantage associated with anything, And for biomass, crops and forest residues often contain, high concentration of nutrients. And if the residue is harvested as energy, these particular nutrients would tend to be lost to the surrounding environment. And we tend to now end up getting synthetic nutrients or fertilizers, which are added to the soil, which technically doesn't end up helping that particular soil itself. And also deforestation is associated with it. So once you tend to cut down the wood for biomass, energy and electrification generation, you tend to lose trees. So that technically is not a good thing. So if we bring it back home, energy consumption in Nigeria. Nigeria, as we know, is a big oil and gas production country, and we tend to focus more on the oil, but we always tend to forget the fact that biomass is big in Nigeria, even though it's more in the local areas and the rural areas. It tends to be roughly around 80% with regards to the consumption in Nigeria. But we also have the association, regards of like natural gas and hydro, but it's really big in Nigeria. Now, from a larger perspective, where else is it identified? It's identified more or less across sub-Saharan Africa. So, the likes of Liberia, Mali, Congo, Angola, and it's really big in those areas across board. So a good example of biomass gasification in Africa is there have been projects in Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Sudan, but most of them haven't been that successful. So a good example is Tanzania. They had the wood industry corporation implement a project over there way back in 2008, and as at today, it had its issues, but it's still up and running. Biomass gasification was introduced in Ethiopia and Sudan, and it faced quite a bit of operational issues and challenges in 2009, 2010. But over time, they've scaled through those issues, but it's still not at full scale as is right now. The main successful one was in Uganda, and that's the Muzizi Tea Estate. And that has replaced fossil fuel generation with a generation of roughly 200 kilowatts across. Biomass Cogeneration has been really successful, and that mostly is associated with the sugar industry in East Africa. And it has helped with regards to creating roughly around 70% of employment across sub-Saharan Africa where the projects are. And it has helped with regards to 50% of GDP for those particular countries. So just really walking through a process. It's, the starch feedstock goes all the way to the starch hydrolysis, and the starch, that's liquefaction, and it goes all the way to fermentation sugars, to yeast fermentation, and the biofuel. So it has been successful, at least in East Africa. If we bring it back down home, Nigeria has tried to implement different projects from a biomass perspective. This slide basically indicates, the type of projects, the amount of money that has been linked to it or that has been planned to it, and each of all these projects have cut across, from planning to EPC stage. So one thing we need to understand that in as much as we all know Nigeria as an oil and gas country, they also are looking to harness, the biomass opportunity that is possible to us. Now, the question is if it's going to go on to being more of a bigger scale that it is. That's the key question. So in conclusion, what I've just tried to present is that what is biomass? Basically, it's a potential alternative source to fossil fuels, which is, but it is not very viable compared to other energy sources. It has its challenges, as we know, and it cuts across different spectrums from development to, and transportation of it, and also carbon being the byproduct of it. So it's not foolproof, but it definitely is an alternative with regards to energy creation, but it hasn't been harnessed on a large scale in Nigeria. And that's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Manuel.
Thank you.
Really good presentation. So I'm just going to pick on some of the things you just said actually in your conclusions about biomass and its viability effectively. So let's just explore that a little bit more. What are we saying here? Is that with regards viability in terms of large scale energy production? Because after all, you did also say 80% of energy consumption in Nigeria today is still from biomass. So what are those things that might be hindering the expansion of this form of energy in Nigeria?
It cuts across. So it's how serious we are as a country with regards to trying to harness the opportunity that is related to it or that's associated to it. The problem that Nigeria has right now is that everyone is just focused on quick and easy. So, crude oil is there, you drill it, you pull it out, you use it, you sell it, you make good cash from it. So they're not interested as of now, even though they, like I said in the previous slide with regards to different projects that are available, but they are it's just more from a talk perspective. The government and, private industries are not yet interested with regards to putting in the cash and also the technology, because it's a technology-based opportunity or technology-based project. So you have to actually have the right technology, be able to go through all the downs and the lows to make sure it works. And I don't think we're that patient with regards to that. So that is one big issue. And like I said, going back to, crude oil being there, it's cheap, it's easy. You just drill a couple of holes, you produce it and you get it out. So those are the key issues, in my opinion, with regards to trying to make it more economical.
I see. Okay,
Yeah.
but it's good at the same time, because I think on one of your slides you also showed some big names in there like NNPC and so maybe Dangote investing in some of this biomass, for effectively for energy production. So it's good to see that at least they are considering it, because sooner or later oil might actually run out in Nigeria.
Yeah, that's a plus. So yeah, so they are, it's, quite a couple of planning pilot projects and the like. So yes, as much as I give them a hard time, with regards to them not being tiers, but it's a step in the right direction. But the hope and the wish is that it's not just going to be one step, it's going to be actually 10 steps. They take it as seriously as other countries, smaller countries like Uganda have taken it, have been a bit more aggressive with regards to it. And Uganda is also, tiny oil producing country. So I think, we're going down the right step.
Opportunities indeed. That's all it's all about. Okay,
Yes,
so thank you very much again, Emmanuel,
Thank you.
Banji. And I think we will just move on to the next presentation now in the interest of time. So Tolu will be presenting next on carbon markets effectively and trading. So Tolu, are you able to come online and share your screen with us, please? If you can hear me, if you would like to please unmute.
Hi there, can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see you. Just waiting to see your screen now.
Yeah, I'm sharing that. So is it showing here?
Not yet. So just can see you at the moment.
Yes.
I think it's coming up now. Brilliant. Okay, I shall hand over to you. And
all right, great. Thank you very much. Hi everyone, my name is Tolu Abudiare, and I will be talking to you about carbon offset and carbon trading. And basically, what we're looking to do today is, Debola and Emmanuel have spoken about different options and different things available on the carbon scene. But this is bringing it back home and just looking at, quote and unquote, how to monetize this and what it means and what opportunities are available. Few things I'll talk about today. I'll give a few definitions of what we talk about. We talk about what we mean when we talk about carbon offset and what I should quote and unquote some of the buzzwords. High level discussion on what carbon trading is. We'll talk through the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, and also we'll talk about CDM in particular, because that is a process that affects or that relates to sub-Saharan Africa more. And then we will talk about opportunities for carbon trading, and we'll look at some of the projects that are in Africa at the moment. Carbon offset and definition. So I think a few things we want to talk about here. We'll look at what is carbon offset. Carbon offset is, should we say, if you can see the diagram there. So organizations, countries, people, we generate carbon in our day-to-day activities. I think the first thing to look at it is why the conversations, why so much talk about carbon. Carbon, as it is, it's a greenhouse gas, and it's a greenhouse gas, and it's got a negative impact, causing global warming around the world today, which is a big pandemic that we're dealing with, in addition to many other things that are going on. So the aim is to reduce the generation of carbon or alternatively, capture some of the carbon that is in the atmosphere already, such that we reduce the rate of decomposition of the ozone layer, reducing global warming as much as possible. So carbon offset is investment or participating in activities, in projects, in designs of items that will reduce dependence on carbon. When we say reduce dependence on carbon, reduce the need for generation and burning of fossil fuel, option for organizations to invest in projects that can, should we say, absorb some of the carbon that we've got abundant in here and get paid for it. And what it is mainly is about incentivizing opportunities as such. Some of the words we'll hear about are AAU, that's the assigned amount unit. Well, what that is in the Kyoto Protocol is it relates to the 1 ton of carbon. It's equals 1 metric ton of carbon, basically, that either you generate or you have because as part of industrialization, organizations or companies countries will generally use up generates carbon. So an AAU is a unit of a ton of carbon that you are allowed by the conventions to should we say, to generate or to save. CER is a certified emissions reduction. So CER, it's for organizations. It's when you are involved in a project or you're involved in activities that will reduce what is carbon that will reduce what carbon that would have generated, or looking at cleaner ways to carry out projects or to do activities that will should we say save a ton of carbon. ERUs, the emission reduction unit, is where national parties, countries are given a target, they're given a level of CO2 that you are allowed to should we say to generate. Once you are able to generate below that value, you have the opportunity to trade the variance in the carbon that you generated. Carbon market. So we've said here that it is a popular but misleading term, and that's a definition from the UNFCCC. UNFCCC is the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. And why I said it is misleading is that it's called the carbon market. It's actually not the trading of carbon alone. It is the trading of other greenhouse gases as well. So it's not just carbon only, it's all other greenhouse gases. However, they are measured in carbon units of carbon, i.e., by ton of carbon. A bit of definition of where we are or the storyline on carbon trading. So early, before the 90s, into early 90s, there were conversations and requirements on how to reduce carbon. But there was an act, the initial act came up in 1990, where the conversation stage started that we need to reduce carbon and how we need to incentivize it. The Kyoto Protocol started in 1997. The Kyoto Protocol itself, it's a treaty between countries under the UNFCCC, where countries agreed to reduce the carbon emitted by each country to a certain level, depending on the level of industrialization in the country. The countries are in the parties, sorry, when I say parties, so parties include countries and organizations such as EU and co. So the agreement, the Kyoto Protocol started off in 1997, and it came into force. It came into active force in 2005. Well, between 1997 and 2005, there were exchanges that started off in China where carbon trading had started. In 2005, the mechanisms for the Kyoto Protocol came into force and actually it started working. I will talk a bit more on that on a future slide. From 2005 into 2015, the Kyoto Protocol was what pretty much the UNFCCC was using for conversations on carbon trade. However, the Paris Agreement was signed. The Paris Agreement is a treaty that was rearranged with organizations and with similar parties to the Kyoto Protocol, a follow-on from Kyoto Protocol from December 2015. By by February 2017 or thereabout, we had 125 parties that are signatories. At the moment, as of 2020, we have about 192 countries that are signatories to the Paris Agreement, and that's an agreement on reduction of carbon by countries across the world. Emissions trading. So under the emissions trading, it allows, part of the Kyoto Protocol, emissions trading allows countries with emissions units to spare. When I say emissions units to spare, countries have been given, or parties that have been given a specific level of carbon, or a specific AAUs to use up. If you have spare AAUs, there are opportunities to trade it with other parties that are exceeding or that are generating more than the targets that have been given. So those conversations were covered in Article 17 of the Kyoto Protocol, as we said, starting from 1997. But under the Kyoto Protocol, the UNFCCC set up three mechanisms to allow different types of partnerships to reduce carbon emissions. First is what was called emission trading. Emissions trading is through Annex 1 countries. Annex 1 parties. Annex 1 parties are, as I mentioned earlier on, they are the developed organizations with set targets. So if for this conversation, an Annex 1 country is given a target and has been able to generate less than that, they have an emissions trading scheme through which you can, you can exchange with other Annex 1 countries. And that we noted that from about 2005 to 2005, similar started off in China. However, one of the most popular emission trading schemes is the EU emissions trading scheme. Joint implementation is between Annex 1 parties as well, but this is where an Annex 1 party is investing in, should we say, in projects in another Annex 1 country to reduce or carbon reducing project in another Annex 1 country. That's between two developed countries. And for example, if there is a solar farm coming up in another Annex 1 country, the Annex country A, and then Annex country B with higher level that has generated higher level of CO2 can invest in that property, invest in that project, and it's pretty much that can be used to offset the amount of a certified and ratified by the UNFCCC for that country. Joint implementation is where, so we've talked about joint implementation. Similar to joint implementation, there is the Clean Development Mechanism. That's what we call the CDM. Now, these are much more popular and these are much more applicable to ourselves in Sub-Saharan Africa. What the CDM is it is an agreement between an Annex 1 country with set ceiling target of CO2 and non-Annex 1 countries. A non-Annex 1 party is pretty much most of non-Annex 1 parties, if not all, are should we say developing countries. And it's been identified that many times the cost of carbon savings in non-Annex 1 countries is relatively cheaper, one, and two, they are not, non-Annex 1 countries are not set rigorous targets as Annex 1 countries have been set under the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. And how does this work? It's basically Annex 1 countries Annex 1 parties investing in opportunities within non-Annex 1 countries. And what that does is they can claim carbon credits, CERs, i.e. to offset the carbon that they've generated in their organization, in their party. However, it gives an opportunity for non-Annex 1 countries, parties, i.e. developing countries, to one, get some financial incentives, two, capacity building, support, basically transfer of knowledge, transfer of development from developed organizations to non-developed parties. That's the primary driver. That's the primary incentive for carbon for CDM. Bringing that a little back home, I'm looking at Sub-Saharan Africa. These are just my own personal thoughts on opportunities that exist. There are opportunities in landfill. So looking at what has been discussed by Emmanuel about on biomasses. There are opportunities in landfill gas. I will talk a bit more on that in the next slide. There are opportunities in solar panel, hydropower, energy efficient stoves. We've seen earlier that about 80% of energy consumption in sub-Saharan Nigeria is actually from biomass. Let's note, when we say energy consumption, it's not about cars only, or it's not about industries only. The energy required to cook your food is something, is a major part to consider as well. Afforestation, so there's a lot of, we've got land. We've got significant, it's a significant level of land. So we can invest in planting of trees, that can be used to reduce dependence, to absorb carbon from the atmosphere, low energy bulbs, and reduction in gas flarings. I've also noted a few of the market limitations that are there, increasing market liquidity. Carbon prices also, it varies. It depends on where you're selling it to or who you are dealing with. And then also the leveling of international playing field, because the carbon prices requires, it needs to be harmonization, it needs to be harmonized across jurisdictions. I've also noted here that global cooperation on climate change. So, for example, there are parties that there is a very, very popular party that is at the moment in process of pulling out of the Paris Agreement for climate change. There is also the additionality clause. Looking at a few of the CDM projects that we have or that we have in Nigeria, I should note in here as well that in addition to some of the lists you've seen here, there are still about what 42, but yeah, over 40 projects as well that have been presented to the UNFCCC, or that are either they are in conversations or are still in conversation. But breaking this down by the number of CERs issued for the projects, the pie chart gives us an idea of the percentage volume of CERs per different aspects of project, the different project type. And it says fugitive. I'm sure that everyone is wondering, what does it mean by fugitive? When it says fugitive, it's talking about pretty much all gas flaring projects, i.e. capture of gas that would have previously been flared into the atmosphere, capturing that and using them and repurposing those gas for other uses. Also landfill gas here. Landfill gas is so gas from degeneration of matter or degeneration of waste. It's actually hydrocarbons are generated, and from that if left alone, they will seep into the atmosphere, also increasing carbon, thereby increasing carbon in the atmosphere. That said, there are opportunities for reuse or capture or prevention of that gas flowing into the atmosphere and repurposing and using it correctly. Energy efficient households. So that's the conversation I mentioned earlier on about opportunities to improve the use of for cooking. For cooking, basically, use of fuel for use for cleaner fuels for cooking, and also switching from fossil fuels. So alternative uses of fuels that would have been burning carbon. So use of alternative fuels for powering factories, powering vehicles, and that ties in smoothly with the conversation we had earlier with Debola on hydrogen. That the list there gives a view of some of the projects that have been noted or that have been approved on CDM in Nigeria. Pretty much that's me done. Thank you very much. The important message is there are opportunities there, and we as an organization, as a country, or as organizations can tap into it if we know where exactly to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Telu. Well done for that. I think, yeah, the concept of CDM is quite interesting. Of course, it was ratified, like you say, along with the Paris Agreement, and that really brings to life that initiative of money exchange between countries, those Annex 1 parties that effectively may have too much or excess amounts of CO2 emitted in the atmosphere, versus developing nations who have a lot of land mass that can effectively build up or that can grow trees, if you like, to capture some of the CO2 in those parts of the world and therefore offset these in credits. So I think it's a really interesting concept. Obviously, But I think that additionality clause of UNFCCC or of the Paris Agreement effectively, how well monitored is that, would you say? Because otherwise one might risk selling the same CDM project to more than one buyer.
So I think the way to look at that is in the definition of the CER, certified. So it's certified by the UNFCCC, acknowledged before you are even able to take it into the market, and also it is monitored over time to ensure that opportunity for double counting it's not possible. In fact, that's one of the primary drivers for the Paris Agreement as well.
Fantastic. Okay. I think I'll have another question in there for Debola, if Debola could come on.
Yes, yeah, me.
Debola, hi. Okay, so just on this whole concept of carbon capture trading and CDM projects. So in the we know that hydrocarbon still remains a very heavy emitter of CO2 into the atmosphere, of greenhouse gases effectively. So are there any particular projects you may know about that you could talk about right now in terms of a case study maybe, or an example where we're effectively capturing CO2 and trading it up as CDM credits or CER credits effectively?
Thanks, Yemi. There's one example where quite a significant CDM project has been implemented in Nigeria. So
okay.
if you can see part of what Tulu presented, he talked about a section known as fugitive emissions, which covers CDM projects that have been executed in Nigeria, and that primarily deals with preventing gas flaring from oil production. So there's a significant project that was implemented in Delta State by Pan Ocean Oil and Gas Company, and it involves reducing the amount of flaring from one of their main oil fields. And this project was implemented or came into operation in about 2010, capturing roughly about 30 million standard cubic feet of gas a day. And that gas is used to power a power station to generate electricity, which is where some of the sustainable development aspects come in. So you can imagine for communities, for example, which may have been using biomass or other sources of fuel for power, are now able to use electricity, which is generated from flared gas or gas that would normally have been flared, which is now captured and converted into electricity. I think there's a couple of key aspects that make this project really interesting. One is, yes, obviously reducing the amount of gas flared and helping the country generate more electricity. And I think the third aspect is because of its ability as a clean development mechanism project to generate certified emission reductions, which are carbon credits, which you can sell in the market, that actually increased the financial viability of the project by increasing its IRR or internal rate of return from about 5% to about 11%. So clearly there are opportunities to make projects which in and of themselves can be viable, even more viable, or increase the profitability by implementing CDM projects. So there's definitely an opportunity to add in value by doing these projects. So you're both doing good and you are making profit at the same time.
That makes absolute sense, actually. I think it's a case where as an investor, say, for example, you might consider the fact that there's a company which is already, which has a base offering, if you like, so base product or service offering. But if you can come up with a business idea that traps and captures that carbon element, or that can convert that additionality clause, if you like, again, that you can show that you can trade off the buyback, then I think that makes absolute sense, because you still have your base case for your revenue, but then you're generating additional revenue off of the capture. So for example, a bit like this Pan Ocean one that you've just said. It is still a bit tricky though, because in some ways you'd almost ask, why not capture that or as part of your base design anyway? So what might make an oil producer to flare the gas over capturing it and then selling that off as CERs to start with?
Well, I guess you need to look at the regulatory environment that helps producers stop flaring. So obviously there's a penalty charge that comes in Nigeria if you flare gas, but oftentimes that charge is not significant enough to force producers to capture the gas. So that many producers are happy to pay the charge instead of capturing the gas. So there's an economic argument there to say when it's economically viable, then producers are more inclined to do that. But in cases where it's not, they may instead choose to
flare.
To flare and take the funds.
Can I chip in there as well? I think there's a need on conversation on what are the penalties for flaring, and how are they implemented, and how are they enforced as well.
Absolutely. So if the penalties are sufficiently high, then there will be fewer instances of these occurrences happening. So, but let's not take away from the message. The message is there are opportunities for you to do good by implementing projects that as a whole reduce CO2 emissions and thereby also provide value to the communities and to the entities investing and return a profit as well. So it doesn't have to necessarily be the type of project we've talked about. For example, if you were to implement, for example, a solar facility that generates electricity and thereby prevents or replaces individuals who've been burning fossil fuels, which generates CO2, you can, as part of that type of project, for example, also see if you can incorporate clean development mechanism aspects and then generate potential certified emissions reductions to sell. So it doesn't always have to be oil and gas focused. There's a lot of potential out there you can think about.
Of course, absolutely. And I think Tolu was good to mention, things like the stove projects, I think, or like you say, again, the solar ones. So if you're able to replace what would have otherwise been burning of hydrocarbons or fuels that are high in CO2 emissions, then you may seek to look into the UNFCCC website to look for opportunities for yourselves. So thank you very much, both of you. I think this concludes the formal aspects of today's presentation. I see that some questions have been coming in from the audience, so thank you very much for that. I do encourage you to use the Q&A, please, to ask your questions, as you do have the benefit of all the Efikos teams here to answer your questions, including myself. So we can maybe take it one question at a time from here. And I'll just invite our two other members, Kola and Femi, to join in with the Q&A session. Okay.
Hi guys. So I'm just going to share my screen now so that we'll run through the questions real quick. Just gonna load. Been hurriedly typing everything.
You've done
in,
well.
so
you've done well.
Just,
Case is usually in the background, pulling it all together. So thank you.
Okay, so almost there. Just loading up. Okay, so I presume you guys can see my screen. I'm just going to go into presentation mode quick. Just boom, boom, boom.
Hello, Femi. Welcome on as well.
Oh, thank you very much, Lee. It's been wonderful.
So just for the guys who are just joining us for the first time, everybody you see on here right now, this is the Efikos team, basically, everybody present. So this one particular webinar serves as a milestone sort of event for us. This is the first time we've all been on one webinar all at the same time. Even though I wasn't presenting, even though they used my picture in the invites, but I was relegated to the background. Anyway, so I'm just gonna hand it over back to you now. All the questions are on the screen, so please go right ahead.
Fantastic. So again, please keep your questions coming. We are here to answer them. And if there's anything we are not able to answer, we're not claiming to be experts in any way, shape or form. And we do have our resident CO2 expert, mind you, by way of develop, but by all means, if we cannot answer anything here and now, we will, please email us and we'll obviously seek to come back to you. So let's just take the questions that we do have for now from Adamu. Adamu asks, should Africa be aiming to increase or decrease biomass use or change how it is used? Okay, that's a good question, Adamu. Can I get Banji to take that one for us?
Sorry, can you ask the question again, please?
Sure. Should Africa be aiming to increase or decrease biomass use or change the way it is utilized?
I would say definitely increase it, because everyone is shifting from the conventional oil and gas and production and use as is. And it's a cheaper way and it's a cheaper form. The two big issues for me are, one, the technology, and the appetite for all the different countries and economies to actually want to progress it, try to make it more commercially available and viable. Because if you don't have the right technology and if you don't have the right economics for it, and you don't have the market for it at the same time, it technically will not be economical for for the people, for the country as a whole. So in my opinion, and like I said, that's just my opinion, other people might think otherwise, but I would think that yes, that if there's a way we can make it a bit more viable and available, and actually invest quite a bit in technology with regards to cleaning up all the byproducts associated with it and finding a market for it, then yes, I think we should, because it's an alternative source. So I think we should.
Absolutely. Okay.
Can I come in there very briefly?
Yes,
Yeah, so I think I'm kind of aligned with what Emmanuel has said, but I would like to focus more on changing how it's used. So a lot of biomass usage right now is for things like domestic cooking and so on. So it's quite inefficient, not very energy efficient, and therefore you're wasting a lot of the energy being produced. So we need to look at ways that we can more efficiently use biomass in Africa. Ways of that include potentially producing biofuels or using even more efficient combustion methods for those domestic uses. So Tolu mentioned briefly around, higher efficiency domestic stoves, for example, as a way of increasing the efficiency. So energy is very valuable. We need to make as efficient use of it as possible and look to move to more efficient methods.
Absolutely, and I think just again,
as well. Not only in Nigeria, we mentioned this a low percentage in Nigeria, but the use of energy efficient, should we say, cooking stoves is actually a big CDM-CR generator within Africa and sub-Saharan Africa as a whole. So it's existing and it's there. We can always just improve on it.
Absolutely. So I think it's all about, I think what we're saying is that yes, we should seek to increase on that. And I think we already touched on the fact that that one day oil might finish. So it would be a good idea to have implemented other forms of energy and knowing how to harness those in the most efficient way possible. So hopefully that answers your question, Adamu. The next question we'll take from Tajuddin. Tajuddin asks, what do you see as challenges for increasing CDM projects in Africa? Fair question. Any takers on that one?
Well, I think I can start in my own opinion. So what are the challenges? One, awareness. How many of us are aware of the fact that this exists? Now, that is one bit. Two, the CDM, the market itself. In developing and in planning our projects, we need to factor this from the planning stage, and I'll give an example of this. So a big option is in landfills, right? So for example, in developed countries, I'm aware of quite a fair bit of landfill where we use landfill gas for energy generation, basically extraction of gases, and it's burned to use to repurposing of the landfill gas for energy generation. But what that requires the design of the landfill itself from the onset to with that ending goal, and also capping of the landfill to achieve that purpose. We need to factor that into our planning. One, two, there is a cost benefit analysis that needs to be done, but it is important as well for Africans and Africa to look out and, should we say, partake and put ourselves out there, for not waiting for for handouts from others. Yeah, that's an option. Yeah, those are some of the challenges for me.
Okay. Any other?
Yeah, just like to add to what Tolu said, and I think that's really hitting the nail on the head. We need to try and think a bit more strategically about these projects and begin to implement plans that take advantage of the opportunities. So don't think in isolation. So if you're trying to fix, for example, your power generation in your industries, how can you leverage on CDM to make those projects more commercially viable and therefore increase their capacity? We need to really begin to think, to use a cliche, out of the box and begin to look at these things earlier on in order to take full advantage of them. So if we don't do that, we'll kind of be, thinking about it in the end as an additive. But if you think about it as a goal in mind during the planning stages, then there's lots of opportunities for benefit there.
I think, make no mistake, I think hydrocarbons are not going anywhere anytime soon. I think the world energy mix is still very highly reliant on the use of burning oil and gas fuels effectively. But notwithstanding, and you mentioned that through the transition of brown to grey to effectively blue-green hydrogen. All we're saying here is those opportunities, if you're able to come up with a creative idea. So whether you as an individual are looking to supply high efficiency stoves to rural areas, whether you're looking to electrify a segment of Nigeria, again, a very rural area, or you're looking to increase opportunities for farmers, through for agricultural purposes. So there are a number of opportunities, and I think it's often said that if not oil, what else could Nigeria be doing? Of course, there's always a lot of conversations around agriculture, but a lot of that agriculture you'd also find could be tied into CDM type projects that could be certified and therefore generate revenue over 6 years, 10 years, however long the certified duration of your project would be. So it's all about thinking strategically, not that fast, quick, easy buck, like we've already said. But yes, the opportunities without a doubt, I think, are there. And as far as the challenges are concerned, I think you find that finance is often the first one, at the forefront of everyone's mind. So, maybe Taji was thinking along the lines of, investment or do I have the funds to put money down to buy several acres of land and start to grow trees that would not be yielding anything for another few good years? As far as that is concerned, is a fair question, but I'm sure that there would be some incentives along the way if you look in the right places, if not from the government, then definitely from foreign investors that might equally wish to partner with you. So hopefully that answers Tajuddin's question. The next one I'll take would be from Ineka. Ineka is asking, how would you describe SSA, so Sub-Saharan Africa Technology Readiness for Biomass Energy Conversion? Actually, just reading through that, I think we've already more or less covered that in the conversation, unless there was anything unique to add on to that. Maybe Emmanuel? Anything we've not already covered, just in the interest
I think it's kind of been covered, to be honest. Yeah. Okay.
So just reading down the list, Patrick is asking, crude oil production is not cheap, neither is it easy. Projects will be driven by business cases, which will show costs and benefits plus reliability of energy produced from biomass. Okay, maybe more of a statement there. No, it is definitely not cheap, but business cases, yes, will show how cost and benefits, balance each other out.
Can I quickly address that one?
Yeah,
I kind of understand where he's coming from, but you have to look at it from a holistic perspective. So a company or a venture capital or a private equity company will be very, very comfortable putting in, investing in oil and gas production, even if it's in Kenya or Uganda or even South Africa, wherever there isn't that much oil and gas production, compared to a biomass project, because they know that if they strike gold, like if they do strike success over there, and it's of economic and commercial quantity, you can commercialize it ASAP and quicker. Whereas for a biomass project, like I mentioned, the ones that are going on in Tanzania and Congo and the likes, they, as much as they are technically meant to be commercial, they are not that successful. So yes, I'm not trying to, well, I guess my statement wasn't trying to downplay biomass, oil and gas, that it's easy. It definitely is not. But it's a lot easier with regards to getting funds for that one compared to a biomass project, as is right now.
Fair enough, yes. I suppose it's quick ROIs that people are looking at.
I think we might need to bring Patrick in at some point to challenge you on that. But yeah, Patrick, if you can hear us in the background, if you do want to come in and speak more on this, by all means, just put that in the chat window. We can give you video and audio access and you can put your statement across. Yeah, Yemi, please go right ahead.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. So Isaac, I think I missed one from Isaac. Is biomass really carbon neutral? I asked myself the exact same question. If you're only just going to burn it up, produce CO2, then is it really carbon neutral? But I would also answer that question myself. I think from what we've learned today, clearly the whole idea is a cyclical process. So when you grow it, to burn it, to capture it, to burn it again. And then the cycle continues. But in that process, you may have made some money via CDM projects. You may have made some money via cash crop and sale. You know, if you've got what do you call it, sugar cane, you obviously refine that, get your sugar out, burn up the chaff. You know, so there could be a number of processes involved in that at a large enough scale to produce. And then I think we spoke about cogeneration as well. So there are definitely opportunities in there. So is it really carbon neutral? It potentially could be if done properly.
Yeah, in my opinion, yes, it is. 1 minus 1 is what? 0. So when you burn biomass, you create CO2. And as we know from, you know, basic integrated science in secondary school is, you know, you need CO2 for photosynthesis. So as it's burnt, CO2 is created, the CO2 goes into the plants, you know, for generation for photosynthesis. So on a large scale, yes, it has the opportunity to be neutral, in my opinion.
Indeed. So Simi is asking, are all countries compelled to sign up to the Paris Agreement? Tolu?
Well, I think the Paris Agreement is primary driver for that is the United Nations framework for conventional climate change. So in as much as there is no, should we say, there is nobody forcing you, and why I'm saying there's nobody forcing you, we know that we've got, as at 2020, we had about 192 countries already signed up. A major player that many of us will be aware of, a major player started pulling out of it, and that is the United States. So I mean, are the rules for different countries different? Those are questions that we honestly we can't answer here. But as part of being a member of the UN United Nations, that's it's part of the requirements for it.
Absolutely, and I think each year the UN or the UNFCCC gives targets, like you say, the AAUs and how much you're allowed to emit per annum. So the whole idea is that they wish to keep a downward trend of the AAUs that you're emitting. In other words, they're asking you to find more creative, more innovative means of reducing your carbon footprint as a country, and therefore the rest is then traded off as CERs and CDM projects, if you like. So. I also do know somehow that that's part of the Paris. Well, are all countries compelled? Well, I suppose they're not compelled, but if you're part of the UN, having said that, I don't think Turkey is necessarily signed up, nor is Iran, who are also very heavy emitters of carbon dioxide. Furthermore, we do know that America also did threaten to pull out of the Paris Agreement recently. So there are. Indeed, I believe they already initiated that process ahead of the elections, but we're not here to talk politics. So notwithstanding, it's probably, well, in as much as other countries might frown at it, it's definitely something that is encouraged. So thank you, Simi, for that question. I'll go straight down to the bottom link in the interest of time again. So Sunday is asking, this initiative ties into UN sustainable goal on affordable and clean energy and climate action. Are there any specific UN agencies intervention plan on this initiative for West Africa countries?
I can take that again. So there are UN agencies for the initiative. Note, it's not it's pretty much a fierce competition as we in Africa, we've got land, we've got, you know, quote unquote, we are non-Annex 1 countries. There are many other non-Annex 1 parties as well. There is South America. There are sections of the Far East. There is Jakarta. There are other countries as well. So it's about one, it's cost benefit for the funders after all. As an organization, as a party, or as a business that is generating above my CER or that are generating above my AAU, I am looking for where the best place to be. So I am not tied to Africa. It is for us as Africans to come together and define how do we want to benefit from this, and and I think just another thought about the challenges. It is scale actually as well, because for you to be able to trade anything, we are talking of thousands of tons of tons of CO2. So not just the solar panel in 4 houses. We need to start looking at how we can scale ourselves up, put ourselves out there, and as a body or as a group of countries or as a group of party or as people we need to set up, put ourselves out there for it, really. So we need to take ownership of it, not wait for United Nations to feed us crumbs.
Can I just come in on that, just to buttress what Tolu said? So definitely, I completely agree. We kind of need to take our destiny in our own hands and begin to implement these projects. But I think the angle I think Sandy was coming from is that, you know, we may not have the wherewithal financially, for example, to be able to initiate these projects, and which is fair enough. There actually is an agency associated with the UN. It's known as the Green Climate Fund, and they're there specifically to support greenhouse gas reductions in developing countries. So there are mechanisms which you can use to apply for funding from the Green Climate Fund to support your projects. So there are opportunities there. We just need to do the work, find out about them, include them in our plans, and, you know, take advantage of the opportunities where they are.
Absolutely. So I think I would just probably encourage anyone listening that might be interested in this as an opportunity. Again, away from the traditional oil and gas, maybe something more creative. Go on to the UNFCCC, yes, 3 Cs, UNFCCC website, and on there it has it has a wealth of information about the different organizations that are currently, well, in fact, it gives you ideas first of all of what projects are currently accredited, underneath the CER schemes and or the CDM schemes, if you like, and how much in dollar-tree value, how much you can effectively sell a certification for. So whether $40, whether $50, whether $60 or $100, depending on the type of project, depending on the location. So go there, do your research, and yeah, you'll be surprised at what might pop to mind as a next business venture, I suppose. Femi, we would like to hear from you. So just any remarks as to maybe some of any of the questions on the board, anything that or that pops to mind that maybe we've not yet already covered?
Thank you very much, Gaby. Obviously to everyone who's presented as well. I suppose not so much a question, but rather just a comment. I'll probably focus on the biomass side of things, in terms of there's still an awful lot of potential in there, and that we can harness as a country. Obviously, Banji, Emmanuel did share with us the trends that we see in Africa. Obviously, it's kind of very difficult to match those trends to when compared to conventional energy. You ask the questions, they're not very visible trends, as we can see. But obviously, there's a lot going on in the background. And probably there is even more intentions as far as that space is concerned. I think there's a lot of growth that can be done in that space. Likewise, obviously, hydrogen, as Debola has talked about, obviously the future there is just mind-blowing, and the capacity and the potential of what we can do in sub-Saharan Africa in that space. And obviously, Tolu, thank you very much. There's a lot of education there, and I think it's just the beginning in terms of, when we begin to talk of carbon trading, the potential and what as a country we can do in that space. So I think for me, obviously, I've been a very silent Efikos today, but obviously absorbing everything in as much as I'm sure everyone that has joined us tonight. So it's wonderful, and I think with what we have learned tonight, and obviously, this is just like a taste for what is to come, or tip of the iceberg, as we like to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Femi. Thank you all for joining in indeed. I think just to give some closing remarks now, thank you once again to the team. I know it's always a lot of effort to pull all of this together. So thank you for your time this evening, and thank you for that knowledge sharing, which is really what we're about, and creating that value that we so seek for the continent as a whole, as well as for the country. This is again to encourage our listeners, if you will like to come onto the platform to talk as a guest, by all means, please email us. And of course, a lot of our content gets put onto YouTube after the event, or after the live webinar, after the live session, for your reference. If you also wish to get some of the slides or be in contact with the guest speakers or ourselves, we're always available, and our information is going to be on this slide pack as well. So just to talk very quickly about the next webinar. So we will be focusing on mental health in the oil and gas industry. It's no news to anyone that the oil and gas industry has been heavily hit, even in this COVID period. Even before the COVID period, I think the price wars between the various OPEC countries was already an issue even before COVID, and now post-economic recovery of countries all over the world. Not to mention a big shift in focus from carbon-based energy sources into non-hydrogen based sources. So I think all of this compounded into what would be the state of the industry for those of us that are working here. So what is that impact on our mental health? How's this affecting jobs, redundancy, pay cuts, in the interest of remote or offsite working? You know, what's the impact of this on your families, hazards, positive and negative impact, I should also say, because I mean, are you deriving more work-life balance, or are you just finding it quite stressful trying to concentrate at home? So yeah, I think a lot of these are what we would seek to cover in the next webinar, which is tentative date 21st of November 2020. And possibly the last one for the year. So join us if you can then again. And yeah, once again, thank you all for joining, and I wish you all a very good evening from here on. Thank you. Thank you, team.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes.